Can a president's constitutionally lawful acts be considered obstruction of justice and an impeachable offense? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this member's only right angle is brought to you by you. Thank you to your membership. Thanks for your membership dollars to making this possible. Gentlemen, I mean, you'd have to be hiding under a rock not to be following this whole story about the investigation into the Trump campaign's efforts to connect, let's say, with Russia, and the whole question now being raised in the media about whether when Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, this could now be considered an act of obstruction of justice and therefore be an impeachable offense. To Trump's defense comes an unlikely suspect, the liberal attorney Alan Dershowitz, who says not so. President Trump has the constitutional authority to fire James Comey. President Trump has constitutional authority to pardon other officials should that become necessary. And a president cannot be impeached, found guilty of obstruction of justice, when he's doing things that the Constitution explicitly permits. Now, gentlemen, this is a fascinating question. And I'm not making a judgment, by the way, just in case anybody's wondering about whether the Trump campaign was doing anything with the Russians or what they were doing. I don't even care about that. The whole question now is it possible that a sitting president of the United States, in this case, could commit an act of obstruction by doing something he's constitutionally permitted to do? So Stephen Green, it's not just a sort of theoretical question, because there are actual human lives on the line here, as far as James Comey and Donald Trump and other people in the Trump campaign who are involved in this whole decision. Is it possible that a president could be acting constitutionally and still be impeachable?
No, and also yes. This is one of those really tricky areas. Like the Constitution says Congress can impeach the president for high crimes and misdemeanors. Well, what does that mean? Back 20 years ago, when Congress was impeaching or preparing to impeach Bill Clinton, liberals said that you can't impeach him for this tiny little thing because it's not a high crime. Well, a high crime doesn't refer to the level of the criminality. Otherwise, they wouldn't have bothered to include misdemeanors in there, because a misdemeanor is not a high crime. No, high crime refers to the position of the person who committed the crime. So is it a high crime? Is it a misdemeanor? I mean, a misdemeanor is a tiny thing. It could be jaywalking, right? So really, impeachment, what is impeachable, is a purely political act. It's whatever Congress wants it to be. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, if you've done your reading on this, Jack Kennedy thought that if he did not find some peaceful way to get the missiles out of Cuba, that Congress would impeach him, not for having committed a crime or a misdemeanor, but for a terrible act of policy. And he may have been right, because the stakes were that high in 1963. So impeachment is what Congress wants it to be. Removal from office is what the Senate does. That's a different matter. But the actual act of impeachment is whatever Congress wants it to be. So the issue of can the president obstruct justice while pursuing his constitutional authority is an interesting kind of a head scratcher, but it's not really germane to anything because of the very nature of impeachment itself.
You know, some people think that the argument on the side of saying no, the president cannot be obstructing justice, but while he's conducting his constitutional duties, is, sort of like, who was it, Charles de Gaulle, who said, "L'État c'est moi." I am the state. Therefore, if you're the president of the United States, you're the nation's chief lawmaker, essentially, and you can't and law enforcer. You can't really be guilty of breaking the law. And in fact, I think previously there was a somewhat Trumpian, somewhat Gaffian Trump's comment that indicated that he was free from that kind of scrutiny. But that's not what's being said here, Bill. We're not saying that that a president can't come under scrutiny for obstruction of justice because he's the president. What we're saying here is, what if it's possible that the president actually intended to obstruct justice and did it in a constitutionally permissible way? Is it possible that he could be doing both, as Steve indicated?
I think we need to get this down to the point of, this argument about which is stronger, the immovable object or the irresistible force, and immediately realize that the fact that you have an immovable object means that there's no irresistible force, and vice versa. The question itself is a non sequitur. You puzzling over something that is ruled out by the question itself. So in this case, first of all, let me say, I like the idea that the president is constantly accountable to the people through Congress, and if they're worried about being impeached, great. I think clearly it's possible for a president to commit obstruction of justice while performing one of the powers given to him by the Constitution. The fact that he has the power doesn't mean that he has the power to use that power illegally, right? I think that's really what it comes down to. We've granted you these powers, okay, but that doesn't mean you have the power to break the law using these powers. By the way, just so we're crystal clear on this, firing of James Comey was not only not obstruction of justice, it was a long overdue dismissal of a guy who looks like was barking mad. But I understand that this whole thing is a witch hunt, and I understand that they're using this as a political witch hunt. But on some level, despite the deterioration in so many standards in this country, the system is working pretty much the way it should be working. The electoral wave that swept Donald Trump into the office means that the House is now Republican, and that try as hard as some bitter, disappointed Democrats might, they've got to prove it. And it's the proving it that's the hard part. And everything we're seeing so far is indicating, if this is all that Mueller's got, is that one of Trump's campaign officials made a legal call to the Russians, but then decided to lie about it. If that's the whole fish caught in this net, great. So yes, I think the idea that the president is immune from any criminal activity because of the powers granted him in the Constitution is not a clear understanding of what those powers were granted for.
And actually, this may sound strange to say, I'm thrilled about this whole debate. I mean, I can't tell you, after spending weeks and weeks and months listening to tripe and trivia and nonsense and celebrity and, all this just flotsam and jetsam in the news, it's good to hear somebody having a constitutional debate. It's somebody saying, what is, constitutionalists and conservatives should be absolutely delighted about this. I'm not saying you should take one side or the other in the debate. I'm just saying you should be glad that anybody's even talking about the Constitution.
Yes, there will be firm constitutional debates as long as there's a Republican president. During the period of a Republican president, the Constitution will be discussed all the time. Sorry, Scott, I didn't mean
to. But if we get to the point where a president conducting foreign policy is unconstitutional, I think we might be in a world of hurt.
Well, yeah, and so, I make no evaluation one way or the other on what people in the Trump campaign did. I could see a scenario in which Donald Trump, innocent and pure as the driven snow, could fire James Comey in order to obstruct an FBI probe into his associates. Let's say he had associates who were guilty of something, but Trump himself was not at the time and later on found out about it. That would be an obstruction of justice. But whether that happened or not doesn't even matter to me. Just the fact that Alan Dershowitz, who I've had many disagreements with over the years, is standing up and basically saying, look, here's the constitutional case. This guy's conducting his duties. He cannot therefore be obstructing justice. And then some other people stand up and say, no, in fact, if he intended to obstruct justice, even in carrying out a constitutional duty, it can therefore be obstruction and he should be impeached, which Stephen is right, is a political act and is not a legal act, as tightly defined by the law. So boys and girls who love the Constitution, rejoice. Somebody's talking about it. Somebody's taking it seriously, as you have been for years. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.